And our current thread is really about how to, first of all, identify a seller's market and how to actually pivot into one. And then once you're there, I think, Ed, maybe we can add this one, how to stay in a seller's market.
Going to be part of the topic today, Jacques. Yeah, absolutely. So let
Wonderful,
me,
Ed, over to you. Yeah.
yeah, let me just ask the question, Jacques. We've been talking about this over the past couple of weeks. Um, Both you and I are in highly competitive, often seen as buyers' markets.
Hmm.
Um, so we have to ask ourselves, what have we done to get out of the buyer's market and into the seller's market?
Is that a rhetorical question, Ed?
It's at the moment a rhetorical, but there will be an exam later.
I am ready for that exam. I am ready when you call on me.
Because we don't want to be the signpost at the side of the road that points the way without ourselves ever going there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm also ready to answer that question whenever it's asked of me. But let me give you an example, and it's a mutual friend of ours, um, someone who's in the media industry and spent a lot of time in the media industry competing with lots and lots of people, because in the media industry, especially internet media, there are thousands of players, terribly easy to set up, very low barriers to entry, um, and they all rely on advertising. So the competition for advertising is ferocious. And finally, our mutual friend looked at this, took stock of himself, using a little bit of advice, and said, "That's not smart. I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting tooth and nail for small amounts of discounted advertising just to stay alive. I want a better life than that." And so he took what had been a side hustle and he's made it his mainstream business. Still has his media operation, still runs, but the pressure is totally off because he doesn't have to finance it through advertising. He can finance it through his side hustle, which in fact involves the media as well. Now, that to me is smart pivoting. He's moved himself out of a space which is insufferably crowded and into a space where there are few competitors with the capability and the facilities that he owns. And he's got a very desirable little business going there now. A lot of people queuing to use his services. Smart.
I agree.
Now, let's look at another example, this one perhaps a little less favorable. And this is of a company that was in a seller's market. And they had a single highly desire in their range, they had a single highly desirable product for which they had exclusive rights and for which there was competition, but the competition wasn't very popular. And they'd set up a very big and very successful market to a single target market, single type of customer. And they were doing very well. But of course, this, as you will recognize, Jacques, is a very high risk business,
Mm.
because someone comes along with a better product or a lower price or a better distribution network or faster supply, and suddenly 80%, and it was 80% of his business, is under threat.
Yep.
He potentially can lose his company. So the smart move, which I'm sure you would advise him of, would be to diversify, to spread out horizontally into different markets and vertically into more products into his existing markets. think that goes without saying. He chose instead to take his single product out of his single market and put it through a different channel. So it would still go to the same market, but the different channel would compete with that market at a level of competition which would probably kill his original market success. Now, that's a very unsmart move to my way of thinking. It may turn out to be the smartest thing that he's ever done. He got a large injection of money because of this, but I wouldn't have done that if I were him. That is pivoting from a seller's market into jumping into the fire of having a seller's market where your two channels with your single product compete with each other, not benevolently. Only one can have the end customer, and the end customer is limited. So, not a clever way of staying in your seller's market, because I fear that somewhere along the line this is going to go horribly pear shaped.
So he is his own worst enemy because what you're describing is he's cannibalizing his niche in the seller's market.
Absolutely. Absolutely the right word. He's cannibalizing his own success in order to get cash generation into the company. But he was making a lot of money anyway. So the company was fairly cash flush. It's a cash market that he's in. Everyone pays COD. So, no issues there. It was pure greed. Not a smart move, I don't think. What do you think, Shot? Would you have advised that one?
Well, I mean, this is where the softer side of decision making comes in, and unfortunately, Ed, when your values sit at that level where success is measured by wealth as is money in the bank, if that is going to be your primary filter, then chasing after these kinds of things. If it was me in that situation, I would have challenged the client for that matter, and really made sure that he is thinking it through, and it's not some means of arriving at some other deeper underlying destination point. So,
Yeah.
and then, but like any decision in business, what the big R is: do your due diligence, do the research. And if
Mm,
you come to the point where you cannot see all facets and angles, get somebody in that can help you do that.
mm, mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Be careful you don't get blinded by immediate opportunity and just ignore all the other factors. So, yeah, a couple of ways of staying in your desired seller's market um, are self improvement. That's the classic one. Just get better and better and better at what you do. In this particular case, there were several opportunities where he could have provided much better service to his existing market and locked them in even tighter. He could have secured additional unique products which were overwhelmingly the desired one and put them into the same channel alongside them, so
Mm.
that you're now locking in. He could have, done one of the loyalty points systems or anything like that. There were many, many opportunities for him to now lock himself in that particular market and thus give himself the opportunity to move, and the time and the finance to move resources into other areas to develop parallel sellers market streams. That would probably have been the smarter way to go. But anyway, we will know the outcome at some stage, I'm sure. So we've talked extensively about buyers markets and sellers markets. If you and it still bewilders me that people starting businesses today have started businesses going into ferociously hostile buyers markets. So you're starting your new business and you positioning yourself in a market where competition is ferocious, There are far too many sellers. There's not enough buyers. There's immense pressure on prices and margins, and you're going to be in that business. And you have to ask yourself why. Or you found yourself in that position, you've slipped into there almost without knowing, and suddenly found yourself in that sort of space, and you just go along, um, trying hard to keep things alive and hoping that they'll get better.
Mm.
They probably won't. So
Sure. Survival.
yeah, and how many businesses are in that mode, especially post COVID? Well, we're not even post COVID, but as a result of the COVID pandemic, where businesses slowed down, the pie is smaller, the competition becomes more and more ferocious. It was local, but now the competition is opened up to worldwide, and so you're all fighting for a slice of a smaller pie and struggling for survival.
Mm.
And we could name 100 industries where that has happened to. Some of it wasn't their fault. Some of it, some external factor just took them apart. Let's take, for instance, you had a factory, you were making components for the motor manufacturers. You were making steel components for motor manufacturers. You were doing very well. You had contracts with all the big guys to make a particular or several particular parts for the motor industry, and you were doing well. You were making money. You employed maybe 100 people. You had a couple of million rands worth of machinery, and then a worldwide steel shortage struck. You can no longer buy steel from the local suppliers because the local manufacturers cannot produce the quality of steel needed for what you need to do. You have to import, and you're standing at the back of a very long queue buying steel from China, probably. And suddenly you can't get supply of your most basic commodity.
Mm.
Now you start coming under pressure to make the deliveries. You have to buy steel via steel brokers who themselves have brokers and brokers and brokers, where the cost of the steel has gone astronomically high. And you find yourself very, very much now in a buyer's market because the motor manufacturer is looking at you and saying, this guy can't reliably supply what I want, and he wants to push his prices up. And if I look around the world at Turkey and Poland and Mexico and Chile and um, everywhere else in the world, Taiwan and Thailand and everywhere else, I can buy these components for half the price. And somehow they seem to get it right. Now you are in trouble through no fault of your own. This is an economic problem that's happened in this country and in other countries in the world. In fact, worldwide.
Mm.
How do you break out of that one? And will it get better? Do you just hang in there on much reduced margins, on much reduced volumes, and retrench some of your staff and hang in there, maybe put some more capital in if you've got it, and hope that you can recover from this situation? Sadly, that's what's happened to a lot of businesses, and finally the pressure's been too much, and that's why we've got so many empty factories standing in our industrial parks. It's wise, if you do find yourself in a situation like this, to step back and say, shouldn't we at this point pivot completely and change to making aluminium components, rubber components, plastic components? We'd have to junk a whole lot of machinery and put a lot of capital in for new machinery. But wouldn't that be better than just going to the war?
Mm.
But very, very difficult for an entrepreneur to do that. This entrepreneur has probably spent the last 20 years, 25 years, building this business from a garage workshop into an employee of maybe a couple of hundred people. and with a big stake in its success. How do you move out of there? And Jacques, your advice, as always, is when you get into a situation like this where you seem to have run out of options, shout for help. For heaven's sake, don't try and think these things through yourself if you are struggling to do so. If the answers come to you, fine. And maybe even if the answers come to you, you opt to go and test the water with a knowledgeable mentor or strategist. Very valuable to do that.
Ed, may I ask a question at that shouting for help? Why do you think so many entrepreneurs don't shout for help in time?
Oh, Jacques, if I could answer that question, you'd be speaking to me from my private island in the Seychelles, I think.
But I'm sure in your experience with your wisdom, you have some idea.
Yeah, yes, of course. Of course, I would invite you to my island, you know that.
Yes, Ed. I think we must certainly create the opportunity for you to get this island. You know.
Um, Jacques, yes, entrepreneurs by nature are self sufficient people. They've grown so ironclad, so thick skinned through all of the things that have been thrown at them in their development of their businesses that they have become terribly self sufficient. And it's a hard habit to break. If you don't listen to anybody else, you are the pirate captain kind of your business. Everybody looks to you as being the rock, the person who's always got all the answers. Now it's quite hard to creep into your office, close the door, and pick up the phone and say, "Please, I need help." That's tough. So I think that's one reason that entrepreneurs just normally don't like to ask for help, because they don't trust anybody else to have the knowledge and skill and understanding of their business that they have.
Hmm,
And I think the
makes sense.
other part of it is that the help doesn't actually explain what they would do very well. I don't think the mentors and coaches and strategists are all that good at saying, here is why you can talk to me, and here's why you should talk to me. And maybe that's because it's very, very difficult to explain that, because it's all circumstance dependent. But I think it's something that the mentors and the strategists and the coaches could work on, to
Hmm.
say, how clear is your offering? Why should someone talk to you? There was a very interesting bit of research done just a little while ago at, I think it was the University of Pretoria, a research on companies that were mentored versus companies that were not mentored. And it produced quite clear and measurable results in terms of profitability, in terms of growth, in terms of staff stability, in terms of um, creativity, and several other dimensions. And even the mentors probably don't know or use that kind of information. It would be invaluable for that information to be out in amongst the entrepreneurs. My experience, the entrepreneurs might speak to their family, and sometimes someone in the family, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, has the wisdom to actually engage and and talk to the entrepreneur, and is trusted sufficiently so that their advice is taken. But it isn't always the case. In many environments, the entrepreneur doesn't talk shop at all to anyone outside of his business, and not very much inside his business. It is also a
Yeah.
factor that entrepreneurs' board of directors are often simply there to fulfill the requirements of having a board of directors. They're not there as mentors and guides and advisors, whereas they should be a board of advisors.
That
So,
is such practical advice, though, Ed. You know, for some reason, we all understand that we need to jump through the hoops as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, the compliance issues with CIPC, the Companies Act, and so forth. And so we tick the boxes.
mm,
And you just triggered me in terms of, let's say you in business with partners and they fellow directors, and you've done that, you've got the title, but the practical value of having a board of directors is not recognized. You see, that sales or selling point for me is certainly something to present. Just look inward. You've got a panel of
mm,
advisors. You've got
mm,
people that can make you, they can help you think out of the box, process out of the box. Because the more we begin to feel the pressure of business decline, the more we stress. The more we stress, you know it as well as I do, it limits our creative thinking ability. And
absolutely.
so when you are talking about let's pivot, let's do things differently, that's the least amount of time or the least moment you're actually going to pivot because you're so stressed. And when you're stressed, we all know what happens to us. We dumb down, and all we're looking to do is to fight or flee. It's that
Mm,
fight or flight syndrome that now kicks in. And it's now the struggle just to survive. So imagine seeking advice outside, and you now have to admit that you have problems. You have to admit your cash flow is really a massive issue. What could you do? And then, I think there's the other thing, just lastly, it is as an entrepreneur, because as you described, I actually like the term that you're using. You are your own pirate captain. I think I'm going to adopt that. I want to be known as the pirate captain of my little practice. But as pirate captain, because you've taken some decisions specifically without consulting anybody else, you also bear the burden and the guilt of accepting the blame for outcomes.
mm,
So it's
yeah.
also difficult to approach somebody and say, sure, I really made a bad call. Just help me through all of this. So it's as far as I can see it psychologically, there's those are also factors that always play a role.
It's also true, Jacques, that we are conditioned from children not to admit fault. It
Oh,
is.
that's the converse. Yes, okay.
So we grow up being punished for committing something that we shouldn't have done, for being somehow faulty. And that goes straight
Mm,
through school. It goes straight through our early life. We get disciplined at work for doing things wrong. And it becomes a culture of denial that we've done things wrong. It's always something I've taught. Joyfully admit your failures. Go around telling everyone, boy, did I make a real foul up here. Let me tell you about it. So long as you're learning each time. You don't want to make the same one twice. But if you can admit to what you did wrong, you encourage everybody else to admit to what they did wrong. And if you're in that kind of environment, then the whole environment is designed as supportive as opposed to condemnation.
mm,
It was phrased so brilliantly well a little while ago. If we taught babies to walk the way we teach school children to behave, young adults to behave, employees what the right things are, managers what the right things are, directors what the right things are, the whole world would never have got off its knees. We would be four-legged creatures because we would,
Wow.
when we try and walk and we take a few tottering steps and fall over, everyone says, "Wow, wasn't that great? You're such a spectacular baby." And if we treated babies like that, we would give them a clap and say to them, "You stupid thing, why can't you walk? You did that wrong, you fell down." And if I was a baby, I would say, "Okay, if I'm going to get screamed at every time I try this walking stuff, I'm just going to stay down here. It's safer."
Sure.
So
That
we also
that's a
have to
critical point.
recognize, yeah, we also have to recognize that in later life, it's tough to admit that we are wrong, that we
Mm.
have somehow been a part of putting ourselves into this, even if we didn't see it coming and maybe could have seen it coming. And if you can admit that, then it's much easier to reach out and to say, "Okay, I screwed up here. How do I get out of this? Let me see if there's someone I can talk to who can maybe talk through it with me, not necessarily give me ideas, but at least be a good sounding board." So, a couple of ways, which are physical of getting out of the problem, and a couple of ways where you need to start thinking about thinking as well.
Hmm. You're gonna share those ways of thinking about thinking, thinking
Sure.
about thinking.
Well, the first thing is thinking about where you are positioning your business. Are you actually in a buyer's market or a seller's market? And if you are, wherever you are you happy being in a buyer's market? Are you making money? Are you growing? In which case, carry on doing what you're doing. You're doing great, guys. If you're not achieving that, then do something about it. If you're in a seller's market, how do you get to stay there? How do you get to reinforce your hold? How do you position yourself to fight off all competition? Think about it. Second thought, if it does go wrong, think about yourself. Are you that pirate captain who has to be perfect the whole time? Can you admit that you're not perfect 100% of the time? Can you think of what would happen if you asked for advice? And finally, can you look within yourself and say, what is my character when I do make mistakes? Because, of course, I make mistakes. We're human. None of us has lived a flawless life where we've never made a single mistake. We know that. What's my character when I do that? Do I hide it or do I openly admit it? Because if I'm hiding it, then everybody around me is going to be doing the same thing. And is that a sensible culture for my organization?
Wow, Ed, wonderful points to actually end our conversation on. As usual, huge pearls of wisdom. For those of you that have been present, thank you very much. For those of you who are listening to this recording, now you see, we're not here to tickle your ears. What we want you to do is be inspired to go and do something, change something. As it is just relaying these stories, when the moment of inspiration hits, make the commitment and therefore make the change. So thank you very much, Ed, as usual. I look forward to our next talk, which is next week, Wednesday, same time, same place.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Jacques, and thanks for the people listening in.
Bye for now.